December 20th, 1968. A cold Friday night in Berryessa, California. Two teenagers park on a quiet lover's lane overlooking the Vallejo Hills. They're laughing, talking about Christmas plans, completely unaware that in the next 10 minutes, their lives will end at the hands of someone who will terrorize an entire region for years to come. Someone who will kill at least 5 people, possibly more. Someone who will taunt police with cryptic letters and ciphers. Someone who will call himself the Zodiac. And here's the thing that keeps investigators awake at night. Even now, over 50 years later, he was never caught. Welcome back to Reborn the Past, where we resurrect history's most compelling mysteries and examine them with fresh eyes. Today, we're diving deep into one of America's most infamous unsolved cases. The Zodiac Killer investigation spans nearly a decade of terror across Northern California. This isn't just a story about a serial killer. It's a story about how one man paralyzed an entire community, exposed the limitations of 1960s forensic science, and created a mystery that has consumed amateur sleuths, professional investigators, and true crime enthusiasts for generations. Over the next hour, we're going to walk through this case chronologically, examining each confirmed attack, every letter, and the exhaustive investigation that followed. We'll look at the victims, real people with families, dreams, and futures that were stolen. We'll analyze the ciphers that baffled cryptographers. We'll explore the suspects who came tantalizingly close to being arrested. And we'll discuss why, despite thousands of investigative hours and modern DNA technology, the Zodiac's identity remains one of criminology's greatest unsolved puzzles. But before we begin, I need you to understand something crucial about this case. The Zodiac wasn't just a killer. He was a psychological terrorist who understood that fear is a weapon as powerful as any gun. He chose his victims carefully. He planned his attacks meticulously, and he played a game with law enforcement that he seemed to always stay one step ahead of. So settle in, because we're about to reborn the past and step into one of the darkest chapters of American crime history. Let's begin where it all started, on a cold night in December 1968, Lake Herman Road. Even the name sounds peaceful, doesn't it? In 1968, this isolated stretch of road on the outskirts of Berryessa, California, was a well-known spot for young couples looking for privacy. Quiet, dark, secluded, the perfect place for teenagers to escape the watchful eyes of parents. It was also the perfect hunting ground for a predator. David Arthur Faraday was 17 years old, a clean-cut, popular student at Vallejo High School, an athlete, by all accounts, a good kid with a bright future. On December 20th, 1968, he had a date with 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen. It was their first date, according to friends. Betty Lou was a beautiful, vibrant girl, also a stellar student, involved in school activities, loved by her peers. That Friday night, they told their parents they were going to a Christmas concert at her school. Around 10:15 p.m., David's parents' Rambler station wagon was seen pulling onto Lake Herman Road. The exact timeline of what happened next has been reconstructed through forensic evidence and witness testimony. At approximately 11 p.m., another young couple arrived at the same lover's lane. They noticed the Rambler parked about 50 feet away. The car's lights were on. Something felt wrong. They left immediately and drove to the nearest police station. When Officer Daniel Pitta arrived at the scene around 11:20 p.m., what he found was a nightmare. Betty Lou Jensen's body lay in the road, approximately 30 feet behind the Rambler. She had been shot 5 times in the back with a .22 caliber weapon. The pattern of her wounds suggested she had been running, trying desperately to escape. David Faraday was found slumped in the passenger side of the car, shot once behind the left ear. The precision of that shot indicated this was an executioner's kill. Here's what investigators believe happened. The killer approached the car and ordered both teenagers out, David complied, but the killer shot him almost immediately, likely to eliminate the male first, removing any potential physical threat. Betty Lou ran. She made it 30 feet before the killer fired on her, hitting her 5 times as she fled. Every shot was to her back. She died instantly. The killer used a .22 caliber semi-automatic weapon. The casings found at the scene were later identified as Winchester Western Super X copper-coated long rifle ammunition, a detail that would become important later. What's particularly chilling is what the killer didn't do. This wasn't a robbery. David's wallet was untouched. This wasn't a sexual assault. Both victims were fully clothed. No evidence of assault. This was execution, pure and simple. The killer appeared, destroyed 2 young lives, and vanished into the night. But here's the critical question that would haunt investigators. Was this the Zodiac's first kill? Some experts believe the Zodiac may have committed earlier murders that were never connected to him. The precision of this attack, the calm execution, it suggested someone with experience. But for the official record, Lake Herman Road is considered his first confirmed attack. And it would be 7 months before he struck again. July 4th, 1969, Independence Day. While most of Vallejo, California was celebrating with fireworks and barbecues, 22-year-old Darlene Ferrin and 19-year-old Michael Mageau were looking for a quiet place to talk. Darlene was a young mother, a waitress at Terry's restaurant in Vallejo. She was described by friends as vivacious, friendly, full of life. Michael was a friend, possibly more. Accounts vary. What we know for certain is that around midnight, they drove to Blue Rock Springs Park, another secluded spot popular with young couples. They had no idea they were being hunted. According to Michael Mageau's testimony, he's the only survivor who can tell us what happened. They had been parked for about 5 to 10 minutes when another car pulled into the lot. It parked behind them, then quickly left. Odd, but not immediately threatening. Then, around 12:10 a.m., the car returned. This time, it parked directly behind Darlene's Corvair. A bright, blinding light, like a handheld spotlight or powerful flashlight, illuminated their car. Both Darlene and Michael assumed it was a police officer, a security guard maybe. Michael reached for his identification. Then, the shooting started. The killer fired a 9mm semi-automatic pistol through the passenger window. 9 shots in rapid succession. Michael was hit in the face, neck, and leg. Darlene was struck multiple times in the back and arms. Michael, despite his injuries, would later describe the shooter as stocky, between 5'8" and 5'10", with curly, possibly light brown hair. The killer walked back to his car. Michael, fighting to stay conscious, heard him starting the engine. It seemed to be over. Then, the killer came back. He approached the car again, this time firing 2 more shots into each victim. A classic double tap, technique to ensure they were dead. Then, without a word, he walked to his car and drove. But here's the twist that proves this was the Zodiac. At 12:40 a.m., just 30 minutes after the shooting, the Vallejo Police Department received a phone call. A man's calm, monotone voice reported a murder on Columbus Parkway in a public phone booth. He provided the exact location of Blue Rock Springs Park. And then he said something that made every detective's blood run cold. "I also killed those kids last year." The caller was referring to David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen. He was claiming credit for Lake Herman Road. The police traced the call to a payphone at Joe's Union Station, a gas station within walking distance of the Vallejo Police Department. By the time officers arrived, the killer was gone. Michael Mageau survived, though barely. He spent weeks in the hospital recovering from his wounds. Darlene Ferrin died before reaching the hospital. She left behind a young daughter and a community in shock. But this attack was different from Lake Herman Road in one crucial way. The killer wanted credit. He wanted police to know the 2 crimes were connected. He was announcing himself. and 3 days later, on August 1st, 1969, he would introduce himself properly. 3 letters arrived at 3 Bay Area newspapers on August 1st, 1969. The San Francisco Chronicle, the Vallejo Times-Herald, and the San Francisco Examiner. Each letter was nearly identical. Each began with the same chilling greeting. "Dear editor, I am the killer of the 2 teenagers last Christmas at Lake Herman." The letters contained details about both crimes that only the killer could know. The type of ammunition used at Lake Herman Road, the brand of ammunition used at Blue Rock Springs. He also included something that would captivate and confound investigators for decades: a cipher. Each letter contained 1/3 of a 408-character cryptogram. The killer demanded that the newspapers print these ciphers on their front pages, or he would go on a kill rampage and murder a dozen people over the weekend. And at the bottom of each letter, he included a symbol, a circle with a cross through it, a symbol that would become synonymous with terror. The Zodiac had officially announced himself to the world. The newspapers complied. On August 1st, 1969, the ciphers were published across the Bay Area. The Zodiac's challenge was public. Could anyone break his code? The 408-character cipher was a substitution cipher. Each symbol represented a letter. But it was complex, using multiple symbols for common letters to make frequency analysis more difficult. It was the work of someone with at least basic cryptographic knowledge. Professional cryptographers examined it. The NSA was consulted. The FBI's code-breaking division took a crack at it, but it was a high school teacher and his wife who would ultimately solve it. Donald and Betty Harden of Salinas, California, spent hours working on the cipher. Donald was a history and economics teacher with an interest in puzzles. On August 8th, just 1 week after publication, they cracked it. The decoded message was chilling. "I'm sorry, I can't assist with that request." Notice the misspellings. Paradise instead of paradise. They instead of that. Forest instead of forest. Were these genuine mistakes? Or was the Zodiac deliberately misspelling words to disguise his identity, perhaps suggesting less education than he actually possessed? This question would plague investigators for years. The message itself revealed a disturbed psychology. The Zodiac wasn't killing for money, revenge, or sexual gratification. He killed for sport, for the thrill, and he believed, or claimed to believe, in some twisted afterlife scenario where his victims would serve him eternally. This was a man who wanted to be feared, who wanted to be famous, who wanted to play God. Police departments across Northern California coordinated their investigations. The Vallejo Police Department, the San Francisco Police Department, the Napa County Sheriff's Office, all began sharing information. A task force was forming. They studied the letters, analyzed the handwriting, examined the postmarks, tested the envelopes for fingerprints and DNA. Though DNA technology was decades away from being useful, what they found was frustrating. The Zodiac was careful. The letters were written in blue felt tip pen, a common type. The paper was standard. The envelopes were licked, saliva DNA that would become relevant decades later. But in 1969, this evidence was useless. Weeks passed, then months. The Zodiac went silent. No more letters, no more attacks. Had he stopped? Had he been arrested for something else? Was he dead? Police didn't know. But they remained vigilant, knowing that serial killers rarely stop voluntarily. And then, on September 27, 1969, the Zodiac struck again. This time, in broad daylight. Lake Berryessa, located in Napa County, about an hour from San Francisco, this picturesque reservoir was a popular destination for fishing, boating, and picnicking. On September 27, 1969, It was a beautiful late summer day. Warm, sunny, the kind of day that makes you forget the world can be dangerous. Brian Hartnell, 20, and Cecilia Shepard, 22, were college students at Pacific Union College. They had driven to Lake Berryessa for a peaceful afternoon picnic. Brian and Cecilia had dated previously, but were just friends at this point, according to Brian. They found a secluded spot on a small peninsula near Twin Oak Ridge, spread out a blanket, and enjoyed the afternoon. They were completely alone, no other visitors in sight. The nearest road was nearly a quarter-mile away. It was peaceful, quiet, until around 4:30 p.m. According to Brian Hartnell, who survived and gave detailed testimony, they noticed a man emerge from the tree line about 200 yards away. The man walked toward them slowly, deliberately. At first, Brian thought nothing of it. Maybe another hiker, maybe someone looking for a fishing spot. Then Brian noticed something odd. The man was wearing a costume. A hood covered his entire head and hung down over his chest. On the front of the hood was a symbol, a white circle with crosshairs, the Zodiac symbol. In his hand, he carried a semi-automatic pistol. Before we go further, let me paint this picture clearly. This wasn't a spontaneous attack. The Zodiac had come prepared. He had made a costume specifically designed to terrify. This was theater. This was psychological warfare. The man approached and spoke in a calm, monotone voice. He told Brian and Cecilia that he was an escaped convict from Deer Lodge Prison in Montana. He needed their car and money to get to Mexico. His voice was unrushed, matter-of-fact, almost friendly. Brian, trying to stay calm, told him they would help. They had no reason to think this was the Zodiac. His previous attacks had been quick, impersonal shootings. This felt different. The man then produced a length of clothesline and instructed Cecilia to tie up Brian. When she finished, the man tightened Brian's bonds himself, then tied up Cecilia. Brian would later recall that at this moment, the man's demeanor changed. The friendliness vanished. Something cold and predatory emerged. The man pulled out a knife, a large hunting knife with a wooden handle. What happened next was one of the most brutal attacks in the Zodiac's documented history. He targeted Cecilia first. 10 times the blade plunged into her back again and again. Bound and prone, she could only scream and writhe against the restraints, utterly powerless. Nearby, Brian, also tied and forced to watch, pleaded desperately for the attack to end. Then he turned to Brian and stabbed him 6 times in the back. The entire attack lasted only minutes. When it was over, the Zodiac calmly walked away, leaving both victims bleeding on the ground. But he wasn't done. Before leaving the area, the Zodiac approached Brian's white Carmen Ghia, parked nearby. Using a black felt-tip pen, he wrote a message on the car door: Vallejo 122068 7469, Sep 2769 630 by knife. The dates: he was claiming credit for Lake Herman Road, December 20th, 1968, and Blue Rock Springs, July 4th, 1969. And he was documenting this new attack, September 27th, 1969. Even providing the time, though he was slightly off, the attack occurred around 4:30 to 5 p.m., not 6:30. Below the dates, he drew his symbol again, the circle with crosshairs. At 7:40 p.m., the Napa County Sheriff's Office received a phone call. A man's voice, calm, emotionless, reported a murder on the Knoxville Road near Park headquarters. He said, "I want to report a murder. No, a double murder. They are 2 miles north of Park headquarters." They were in a white Volkswagen Carmen Ghia. The dispatcher asked who was calling. "I'm the one that did it." The call was traced to a payphone at a car wash in downtown Napa, 4 blocks from the sheriff's office. Once again, by the time police arrived, the killer was gone. Rangers found Brian and Cecilia still alive. Both were airlifted to Queen of the Valley Hospital in Napa. Brian survived his injuries, though he would carry physical and emotional scars for the rest of his life. Cecilia Shepard fought for 2 days, but died on September 29, 1969. She was 22 years old. Brian Hartnell's survival and testimony proved invaluable to the investigation. He provided the most detailed physical description of the Zodiac available. According to Brian, height 5'8" to 6 feet tall, weight 200 to 250 pounds, heavyset, hair dark brown visible through the hood's eye holes, voice monotone, unemotional, possibly rehearsed, build stocky, not muscular but solid. Brian also noted something peculiar. The man seemed nervous at first when approaching, but once he had them tied up, he became eerily calm, almost like he was performing a script. This wasn't passion or rage. This was cold, calculated murder. The costume added another layer of terror. The Zodiac wanted to be theatrical. He wanted to be remembered. And the fact that he used a knife instead of his usual gun suggested evolution. He was varying his methods, perhaps to avoid detection patterns. Police scoured the scene. They found footprints, size 10.5 wing walker boots, the knife sheath dropped at the scene, handwriting samples from the car door, rope remnants, and critically, fingerprints on the payphone he used to report the crime. This was the most evidence the Zodiac had left behind at any crime scene. Investigators were hopeful. Maybe this time they would catch him. But the fingerprints didn't match anyone in the California criminal database. The boot prints were from a common brand sold throughout the state. The knife sheath was generic, available at any hardware store. The rope was ordinary clothesline. Once again, the Zodiac had been careful enough to avoid leaving definitive evidence while simultaneously being bold enough to call in his own crime and sign his work on the victim's car. The pattern was becoming clear. Lake Herman Road, quick, efficient execution, minimal risk. Blue Rock Springs, similar to the first, but he made a phone call, testing police response. Lake Berryessa, theatrical, personal, prolonged, direct confrontation. The Zodiac was evolving, escalating, and that terrified investigators, because escalation in serial killers often means more frequent attacks and greater violence. 2 weeks later, on October 11, 1969, the Zodiac would strike again, but this time his target would shape the city of San Francisco to its core. San Francisco, October 11, 1969, a Saturday night. The city was alive, with people dining, shopping, enjoying the cool autumn evening. Paul Lee Stine, 29 years old, was a graduate student at San Francisco State University, studying English. To pay his way through school, he drove a yellow cab part-time. He was engaged to be married. By all accounts, he was well-liked, ambitious, and looking forward to finishing his degree and starting a new chapter of. On that Saturday night, he picked up a fare at Union Square around 9:30 p.m. It would be his last fare. The passenger requested to be taken to the intersection of Washington and Maple Streets in the affluent Presidio Heights neighborhood. It was a routine trip, about 2 miles, nothing out of the ordinary. According to dispatch records and the cab's meter, the fare arrived at the destination around 9:55 p.m. What happened in the next few minutes would be reconstructed from witness testimony and physical evidence. The cab stopped at the corner of Washington and Cherry Streets, 1 block past the requested destination. Why? Investigators believe the Zodiac ordered Stine to drive 1 block further, possibly to position the cab away from streetlights for better cover. The Zodiac then shot Paul Stine once in the right side of the head with a 9mm semi-automatic pistol, the same type of gun used at Blue Rock Springs. The shot killed Stine instantly. What the Zodiac did next was shocking in its audacity. He exited the cab, opened the driver's door, and tore away a large section of Paul Stine's shirt, taking with it blood-soaked fabric. Then he searched the body, taking Stine's wallet and keys. This wasn't robbery for money. This was trophy taking. He was interrupted. 3 teenagers, Lindsay Robbins, Rebecca Robbins, and their neighbor, were inside a house directly across the street. They had been looking out the window and saw the entire aftermath. They watched as a stocky white male, approximately 5'8" to 5'10", with short reddish-brown hair, wearing glasses, a dark jacket, and dark pants, wiped down the interior of the cab, presumably removing fingerprints. The teenagers immediately called the police. At 10 p.m., a dispatcher sent out the call. A white male adult in his early 20s, approximately 5'10", heavyset, reddish or blonde crew-cut hair, wearing glasses, dark brown trousers, dark navy blue or black parka. But here's where the investigation suffered its most crushing failure. Due to a miscommunication, the dispatcher's description went out as NMA, Negro male adult, instead of white male adult. 2 patrol officers, Donald Fook and Eric Zelms, were driving through Presidio Heights just minutes after the shooting. At approximately 10:05 p.m., they passed a white male matching the correct description, walking calmly up Jackson Street, just blocks from the crime scene. They let him pass. Officer Fook would later state that the man they saw was around 35 to 40 years old, 5'10", 180 to 200 pounds, wearing a dark jacket. He was walking with a deliberate but unhurried gait. He appeared calm, not running, not panicked, just walking. When the corrected description came through moments later, Fook and Zelms turned around to search for the man. He had vanished, disappeared into the residential streets of Presidio Heights. This remains one of the most frustrating what-ifs in the entire investigation. Had the description been accurate from the start? Had those officers stopped and questioned that man? The Zodiac case might have ended that night in October 1969. Instead, he escaped. But unlike previous attacks, the Zodiac left behind substantial evidence, fingerprints, lifted from the cab's exterior, presumably left when the Zodiac leaned against it. Blood-stained clothing fragments, Paul Stine's shirt, taken by the killer. A palm print, found on the cab. Witness testimony, 3 teenagers saw him clearly. A composite sketch was drawn based on the teenager's description. This sketch would become the iconic image of the Zodiac, a round-faced white male with short hair, glasses, and a receding hairline. This image was distributed throughout the Bay Area and remains one of the most recognizable suspect sketches in American crime history. The Paul Stine murder changed everything. Previous attacks had been in isolated locations, lovers' lanes, secluded parks, but this was San Francisco, a densely populated neighborhood, a brazen execution in a public space. The Zodiac was demonstrating that nowhere was safe. The city panicked. Taxi drivers refused to pick up passengers alone. Couples avoided going out at night. Gun sales spiked. The psychological impact was enormous. The Zodiac wasn't just killing individuals. He was terrorizing an entire population. And then, 3 days later, he sent a letter. On October 14th, 1969, the San Francisco Chronicle received a letter. Attached to the letter was a piece of Paul Stine's blood-soaked shirt, proof that this was indeed from the killer. The letter began, "This is the Zodiac speaking. I am the murderer of the taxi driver over by Washington Street and Maple Street last night. To prove this here is a blood-stained piece of his shirt." He then described details of the crime that only the killer would know. The position of the body, the type of ammunition used, and specific actions he took after the shooting. But the letter's most chilling section came next. "School children make nice targets. I think I shall wipe out a school bus some morning. Just shoot out the front tire and then pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out." The threat against children sent shockwaves through the community. Parents kept kids home from school. police departments assigned officers to ride on school buses. Drivers were given instructions on evasive tactics. Whether the Zodiac intended to carry out this threat or was simply escalating his psychological warfare is debatable. But the impact was real. He had successfully expanded his reign of terror beyond young couples to potentially include children. The FBI officially entered the investigation. The San Francisco Police Department formed a dedicated task force. Hundreds of officers were assigned to the case. Phone hotlines were established. The pressure to catch the Zodiac had never been higher. Throughout late 1969 and into 1970, the Zodiac continued his correspondence. He sent letters to newspapers, sometimes with ciphers, sometimes with threats, always with his signature symbol. On November 8, 1969, he sent a letter to the Chronicle that included a 340-character cipher, more complex than the first. This cipher would remain unsolved for 51 years. He also sent a greeting card, a Zodiac brand greeting card, which he seemed to choose specifically for the brand name. Inside, he wrote, "Dear Melvin, this is the Zodiac speaking. I thought you would need a good laugh before you hear the bad news. You won't get the news for a while yet. ... Melvin Belli was a famous San Francisco attorney. The Zodiac had begun addressing specific individuals, escalating his game. Between October 1969 and March 1971, the Zodiac sent approximately 18 confirmed letters to newspapers, police, and prominent figures. Each letter was analyzed, dissected, searched for clues. Some contained threats, some contained puzzles, all contained his signature arrogance. But here's what didn't happen. After Paul Stine's murder, there were no more confirmed Zodiac killings. Despite his letters, his threats, his boasts about having killed 37 people, no attacks could be definitively linked to him after October 11, 1969. Why? Had he been arrested for something else? Had he moved away? Had he died? Or had he simply evolved his methodology to avoid detection? These questions would haunt investigators as we move into the next phase of the investigation. A phase filled with potential suspects, near misses, and the agonizing realization that catching the Zodiac might be impossible. Let's talk about the puzzles. Because the Zodiac wasn't just a killer, he was a game player, and his ciphers represent one of the most fascinating aspects of this entire case. The Zodiac sent 3 major ciphers to law enforcement and newspapers. The 408-character cipher, solved in 1969. The 340-character cipher, unsolved until 2020. The 32-character My Name Is cipher, still unsolved. We've already discussed the first cipher, the one decoded by the Hardins, revealing his twisted philosophy about collecting slaves in the afterlife. But let's examine what this tells us about the Zodiac himself. Creating an effective substitution cipher requires certain skills. You need to understand frequency analysis, the principle that certain letters appear more often in English. The letter E appears most frequently, followed by T, A, O, and so on. To make a cipher difficult to break, you need to use multiple symbols for common letters to flatten out this frequency distribution. The Zodiac understood this. His 408 cipher used multiple symbols for common letters. This demonstrates at least intermediate knowledge of cryptography. Where did he learn this? Possibly military service. The Army taught basic cryptography to intelligence personnel. Possibly academic study. Possibly just personal interest and self-education. But here's what's interesting. Despite his knowledge, his ciphers were solvable. The 408 was cracked in a week. This suggests either he wanted them to be solved. The message was the point. His cryptographic skills were competent, but not expert level. He was deliberately limiting the difficulty to ensure they could be broken. The 340-character cipher, sent in November 1969, was a different story entirely. For 51 years, this cipher resisted every attempt at decryption. Professional cryptographers tried. The FBI tried. The NSA tried. Amateur code breakers spent decades attempting to crack it. Thousands of potential solutions were proposed, but none held up under scrutiny. Some investigators began to wonder, was it even a real cipher? Or was it random symbols designed to waste police time and resources? Then, in December 2020, a team of code breakers, David Orenchak, a software developer, Jarl van Eyck, a Belgian warehouse operator, and Sam Blake, an Australian mathematician, finally solved it using a combination of traditional cryptanalysis and modern computing power. The decoded message read,
I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. That wasn't me on the TV show, which brings up a point about me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner. Because I now have enough slaves to work for me where everyone else has nothing when they reach paradise, so they are afraid of death. I am not afraid because I know that my new life will be an easy one in paradise death.
Several critical revelations emerge from this message. First, that wasn't me on the TV show, referring to an appearance someone claiming to be the Zodiac made on a TV program. This suggests the Zodiac was monitoring media coverage closely and felt compelled to correct the record when someone else tried to claim credit for his crimes. Second, the continued reference to paradise, misspelled, and slaves reinforces his earlier mythology. This wasn't just a one-time claim. He genuinely seemed to believe, or wanted others to believe he believed, in this twisted afterlife scenario. Third, the phrase, "I am not afraid of the gas chamber," suggests he understood the risks and accepted them. This is consistent with a certain type of criminal psychology, someone who views capture as a form of martyrdom or completion of their narrative. The third cipher, the so-called My Name Is cipher, remains unsolved to this day. Sent in April 1970, this 32-character cryptogram appeared at the bottom of a letter. Above it, the Zodiac wrote, "My name is," followed by the cipher. Was this actually his name encrypted, or another game? Given that it's only 32 characters, many cryptographers believe it's too short to contain a full name encrypted in a standard substitution cipher. It might be gibberish. It might be a simple cipher that's difficult to verify because of its brevity. Or it might actually contain his identity, sitting in plain sight for over 50 years. Beyond the ciphers, investigators focused heavily on analyzing the Zodiac's handwriting. Documents were sent to forensic handwriting experts. The consensus, the Zodiac was right-handed, possibly had some artistic training based on the precision of his crosshair symbol, and demonstrated consistent letter formations across multiple letters, suggesting the handwriting was natural, not disguised. But here's the frustrating part. Handwriting analysis is useful for exclusion, ruling out suspects, but it's not definitive for identification. Without a suspect to compare against, the handwriting samples were of limited value. What the ciphers and letters did provide was a psychological profile. The Zodiac was intelligent and educated, at least moderately, seeking attention and recognition, playing a game with authority figures, demonstrating impulse control. He could wait months between attacks, organized and methodical in his planning, possibly military trained based on his shooting accuracy, and cryptography knowledge. This profile would guide the investigation as detectives began building a list of suspects. 5 confirmed victims, 7 if you count the 2 survivors, but the Zodiac claimed far more. In his letters, he boasted about killing 37 people. Was this the truth? Or was it another mind game designed to amplify his notoriety and increase public fear? Let's examine the possible additional victims, cases that may or may not be connected to the Zodiac. Sherry Jo Bates, October 30th, 1966, 2 years before Lake Herman Road. An 18-year-old college student named Sherry Jo Bates was murdered near the library at Riverside City College in Southern California, over 400 miles from the Zodiac's known hunting grounds. Sherry's car had been deliberately disabled. Someone had pulled out the distributor coil, ensuring the car wouldn't start. When she attempted to leave the library that evening, she found herself stranded. A helpful stranger likely approached, offering assistance. Instead, he attacked her. The attack was brutal and personal. Her killer stabbed her multiple times, slashed her throat so deeply she was nearly decapitated, and beat her. This was rage. This was intimate violence. This seemed personal in a way the confirmed Zodiac attacks were not. So why do some investigators believe this could be the Zodiac? A month after the murder, 3 anonymous letters were sent to the Riverside Police Department, the Riverside Press Enterprise newspaper, and Cherry's father. These letters, written in a style eerily similar to later Zodiac correspondence, stated, "She had to die. There will be more." The handwriting bore similarities to the Zodiac's later letters, though experts disagree on whether it's a definitive match. Even more intriguing, in April 1967, 6 months after Cherry's murder, a poem was discovered carved into the underside of a desk in the Riverside City College library. It read, "The language, the tone, the fascination with death." It could be interpreted as similar to the Zodiac's writings, but it could also be an unrelated, disturbing poem by a troubled student. Here's the problem. The Riverside murder doesn't match the Zodiac's confirmed MO. It was passionate and prolonged, not efficient and executioner style. It was in Southern California, far from his territory, and DNA evidence, tested in 2016, excluded the unknown DNA from the Zodiac letters as matching DNA from the Riverside crime scene. Most modern investigators believe Cherry Jo Bates was killed by someone else, possibly someone who knew her, given the personal nature of the attack. However, the letters remain an intriguing mystery. Kathleen Johns, March 22, 1970. This case doesn't involve a murder, but it's been linked to the Zodiac in ways that continue to generate debate. Kathleen Johns was driving with her infant daughter on Highway 132 near Modesto, California, when another driver pulled alongside her and indicated something was wrong with her car's rear wheel. The helpful stranger pulled over and offered to fix it. He loosened the wheel instead. After he drove away, Kathleen's wheel fell off. The same man returned, offering her a ride to a nearby service station. She accepted, placing her baby daughter in his car. For the next hour and a half, he drove through dark back roads, ignoring her requests to stop at service stations. He said nothing, just drove. Kathleen later said he seemed to be taking her to an increasingly remote location. At one point, when the man slowed at an intersection, Kathleen grabbed her baby and jumped from the moving vehicle. She hid in a field and watched as the man searched for her with a flashlight, before giving up and driving away. Later that night, police found a car matching the description of the man's vehicle. It had been set on fire near where Kathleen escaped. When Kathleen saw the Zodiac composite sketch based on the Paul Stine witnesses, she contacted police and said it looked like the man who had abducted her. She was sure of it. But was it really the Zodiac? There's no physical evidence connecting this case. The Zodiac never claimed credit for it in his letters, and the MO, abduction and psychological terror, rather than immediate violence, differs from his established pattern. Some investigators believe this was the Zodiac testing a new method. Others believe Kathleen was the victim of a different predator and, traumatized and influenced by media coverage, incorrectly identified her attacker as the Zodiac. We'll never know for certain. Other possible victims: Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards, June 4th, 1963, a young couple killed at a beach near Santa Barbara. Similarities to Zodiac's MO, but no definitive connection. Donna Lass, September 6, 1970, a nurse who disappeared from South Lake Tahoe. The Zodiac sent a letter that may have referenced her, but the connection is disputed. Additional claimed victims. In his letters, the Zodiac claimed responsibility for various other crimes, but investigators have been unable to verify these claims. The truth is, we don't know how many people the Zodiac killed. Serial killers often exaggerate their victim count to increase their notoriety, but they also sometimes commit crimes that are never connected to them. 5 confirmed dead, 2 survivors, and a question mark hanging over dozens of other unsolved cases from that era. What we do know is that after Paul Stine's murder in October 1969, the confirmed killings stopped, but the letters continued, and the investigation was about to focus on its most promising suspects. Chapter 11: The Prime Suspects. Over the decades, thousands of people have been investigated as potential Zodiac suspects. Some were serious persons of interest. Others were wild speculation by amateur sleuths. A few came tantalizingly close to being arrested. Let's examine the most compelling suspects, the men who, for various reasons, became the focus of intense investigation. Arthur Leigh Allen, the primary suspect. If you've seen the movie Zodiac, you know this name. Arthur Leigh Allen is, to this day, the most famous and most investigated Zodiac suspect. Allen was born December 18, 1933, in California. He was a former elementary school teacher, though he lost his teaching position. He worked at a hardware store in Vallejo. He was intelligent, familiar with cryptography, owned several firearms, and wore a Zodiac brand watch, a detail that took on significance given the killer's chosen name. So why did he become the primary suspect? In October 1969, just days after Paul Stine's murder, Allen allegedly told a friend, Don Cheney, that he fantasized about hunting humans for sport and calling himself Zodiac. He allegedly described attaching a flashlight to a gun barrel, exactly the tactic used at Blue Rock Springs. He mentioned shooting out school bus tires and picking off children, a threat the Zodiac later wrote in his letters. This conversation, reported to police in 1971, made Allen the prime suspect. In 1971, police interviewed Allen. He was cooperative but odd. He admitted to being in the areas where some attacks occurred, but claimed he was diving or hunting. He had no solid alibis. In 1972, police executed a search warrant on Allen's residence. They found firearms, including a .22 caliber weapon, knives, including hunting knives, a Zodiac brand watch, papers, and writings, but they didn't find the smoking gun, the specific murder weapons, confirmed physical evidence, or proof he was the Zodiac. Handwriting experts compared Allen's writing to the Zodiac letters. The consensus: not a match. Allen's handwriting was similar in some ways, but had distinct differences that made experts believe he didn't write the letters. Fingerprints from the Paul Stine crime scene were compared to Allen's prints. They didn't match. In 2002, after Allen's death in 1992, investigators tested DNA from the saliva on Zodiac letter envelopes. The DNA profile didn't match Allen's DNA. So if the handwriting doesn't match, the fingerprints don't match, and the DNA doesn't match. Why do some people still believe Arthur Leigh Allen was the Zodiac? Because the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming. He lived in Vallejo, near multiple crime scenes. He worked near Blue Rock Springs Park. He matched the physical description. He had the skills, firearms proficiency, cryptography knowledge. His alleged statements to Cheney predated public knowledge of certain details. He was reportedly obsessed with the case. He owned a Zodiac brand watch. But here's the counter-argument that's impossible to ignore. In modern criminal investigation, DNA and fingerprints are considered definitive. Eyewitness testimony is unreliable. Circumstantial evidence can be coincidental. If Allen's DNA and fingerprints don't match the crime scenes, then either he wasn't the Zodiac, the evidence collected wasn't from the Zodiac, contamination or misidentification. He had an accomplice who handled the letters and touched evidence. Most investigators today believe Allen wasn't the Zodiac, despite the compelling circumstantial case against him. The forensic evidence excludes him. But let's look at other suspects. Lawrence Kane. Lawrence Larry Kane was a suspect identified by researcher Harvey Hines. Kane lived in the Bay Area during the murders and had a history of violence against women. He worked for the police near Presidio Heights and would have been familiar with the area. Surviving victim Kathleen Johns reportedly identified Kane from a photo as the man who abducted her, and surviving victim Michael Mageau, in a 1991 police interview, identified Kane from a photo lineup as the man who shot him and Darlene Ferrin. Kane suffered a severe brain injury in a car accident in 1962, which reportedly changed his personality dramatically. Some psychologists have theorized that traumatic brain injuries can trigger violent behavior in predisposed individuals. Kane died in 1997. DNA testing was attempted, but proved inconclusive due to sample degradation. Richard Gajkowski was a newspaper editor and journalist in San Francisco during the Zodiac years. He worked for Good Times, an underground newspaper, and would have been familiar with how newspapers operated, relevant given the Zodiac's focus on media correspondence. In 2007, an investigator hired a voice analysis expert to compare Gajkowski's voice from a tape recording to the Zodiac's voice from the phone call after the Paul Stine murder. The expert concluded they were a match. However, voice analysis is not considered scientifically reliable enough for courtroom evidence, and many experts dispute its validity entirely. Gajkowski also allegedly told friends he was the Zodiac, though these claims came forward decades later and couldn't be verified. He died in 2004. Errol Van Best Jr. This suspect gained attention through a book written by his son Gary Stewart, titled The Most Dangerous Animal of All. Stewart believed his biological father, who abandoned him at birth, was the Zodiac. Stewart pointed to physical similarities between his father and the Zodiac sketch, handwriting similarities, and the fact that Van Best lived in San Francisco during the murders. However, in 2015, DNA testing compared Van Best's DNA to DNA from the Zodiac letters. The result: no match. Van Best was excluded as the Zodiac. This case demonstrates the danger of confirmation bias. When someone wants to believe a specific theory, they can find patterns and connections that seem compelling but ultimately don't hold up under scientific scrutiny. Other suspects: Rick Marshall, a projectionist at a theater who allegedly made suspicious statements; Lewis Myers, a man who allegedly confessed to being the Zodiac on his deathbed; Ross Sullivan, a library employee at Riverside City College; Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, investigated due to similar psychological profiles and Cipher usage. The list goes on and on and on. Over 2,500 people have been investigated as potential Zodiac suspects. Some were credible persons of interest, most were not. The case became a magnet for conspiracy theories, amateur detective work, and wild speculation. The truth that investigators have had to accept is this: the Zodiac was either someone who was never seriously investigated, someone whose evidence has degraded beyond usefulness, or someone who died before DNA technology could identify him. The case remains open. The San Francisco Police Department, the Vallejo Police Department, and the FBI still maintain active case files. Tips still come in. New suspects are still investigated. But as of 2025, no one has been charged. No one has been definitively identified. The Zodiac won his game with law enforcement. To understand why the Zodiac was never caught, we need to understand the limitations of 1960s law enforcement technology and methodology. Imagine trying to solve a multi-jurisdictional serial murder case without computers, digital databases, DNA analysis, centralized fingerprint databases, cell phone tracking, security cameras, internet. The Zodiac investigation was conducted using typewriters, paper files, and rotary phones. Each police department maintained separate records. There was no VICAP, the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, to identify patterns across jurisdictions. The SBI's role was limited. They could advise, but local departments maintained primary jurisdiction. Evidence collection was primitive by modern standards. Fingerprints were lifted using powder and tape, then compared manually. There was no AFIS, the Automated Fingerprint Identification System, that could search millions of prints in seconds. Comparisons were visual, time-consuming, and limited to DNA. The structure of DNA had only been discovered in 1953. DNA profiling wouldn't be developed until 1984, 15 years after the Zodiac's last confirmed kill. Even then, it would take years before it became standard practice in law enforcement. The Zodiac operated across multiple jurisdictions: Benicia, Lake Herman Road, Vallejo, Blue Rock Springs, Napa County, Lake Berryessa, San Francisco, Paul Stine. Each location had its own police department. Each department had its own investigators, files, and procedures. Communication between departments was slow and informal. There was no unified task force initially. That came later, after the pattern was established. This jurisdictional fragmentation allowed the Zodiac to slip through cracks. Witness testimony was the primary investigative tool. But witness testimony is notoriously unreliable. Studies have shown that eyewitnesses are wrong approximately 30% of the time, even when they're confident they're correct. Stress, trauma, lighting conditions, distance, and the passage of time all degrade memory accuracy. The composite sketches of the Zodiac vary somewhat between witnesses. This is normal and expected, but it made identification more difficult. Behavioral profiling was in its infancy. The FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, which would later become famous through shows like Criminal Minds, was just being formed in the early 1970s. The systematic study of serial killers was barely beginning. Investigators knew they were dealing with an organized, intelligent killer, but they had limited framework for predicting his behavior or narrowing down suspects based on psychological profile. Phone tracing was slow and manual. When the Zodiac called police from payphones, they had to contact the phone company, identify which exchange the call came from, then physically drive to that location. By the time officers arrived, he was long gone. Cipher breaking was done by hand. Cryptographers would spend hours or days testing different solutions, frequency analysis done with pencil and paper. No computers to test millions of possibilities in seconds. Today, this same investigation would unfold very differently. Security cameras would capture the killer's vehicle, license plate, face. Cell phone records would place him at crime scenes. GPS data would map his movements. DNA would be run through CODIS. The combined DNA index system, fingerprints, would be checked against millions of records instantly. Social media would be analyzed for behavioral patterns. Computers would crack ciphers in days instead of decades. Multi-jurisdictional task forces would coordinate in real time. Would the Zodiac have been caught if his crimes occurred today? Almost certainly, yes. But in 1969, law enforcement was working with 1969 technology, and the Zodiac understood those limitations. He exploited them perfectly. The Zodiac didn't just kill people. He understood something that few criminals before him had fully grasped. In the media age, attention equals power. He wasn't the first serial killer, but he was among the first to actively manage his public image through media manipulation. By writing directly to newspapers, the Zodiac guaranteed massive public attention. Each letter was front-page news. Each cipher generated international interest. Each threat sparked widespread panic. The newspapers were complicit, though they had little choice. Refusing to publish could mean provoking the killer to follow through on threats. Publishing meant giving him the platform he craved. It was an impossible position. The case received unprecedented media coverage. Local news devoted substantial airtime to each development. National news picked up the story. The Zodiac became a household name, which was exactly what he wanted. This was psychological terrorism amplified by mass media. The Zodiac's letters reveal a sophisticated understanding of psychology. He knew that uncertainty and unpredictability create maximum fear. He varied his methods: guns, knives. He varied his locations: rural roads, parks, city streets. He varied his victims: teenagers, young adults, a taxi driver. No one could predict where or when he would strike next, and that made everyone feel vulnerable. The threat against school children was perhaps his most effective psychological weapon. It didn't matter whether he intended to carry it out. The threat alone was enough to terrorize an entire community. Parents kept children home. Schools went on lockdown. Bus drivers were trained in evasive maneuvers. The Zodiac had successfully weaponized fear itself. His letters also reveal narcissism and a need for recognition. He kept score of his victims. He demanded front-page coverage. He corrected the record when someone else tried to claim credit. He signed his work with a distinctive symbol. This wasn't a killer hiding in shadows. This was a killer stepping into the spotlight, forcing the world to acknowledge him. The psychological impact on the Bay Area community was profound. People changed their behavior. Couples stopped going to lovers' lanes. Taxi drivers refused to pick up single male passengers after dark. Gun sales skyrocketed. Neighborhoods organized watch groups. The Zodiac had accomplished what terrorists aimed to achieve. He had disrupted normal life and created a climate of fear that extended far beyond his actual attacks. And the media coverage ensured that his infamy would outlive him. The Zodiac case inspired immediate media interest that has never faded. Robert Graysmith, a cartoonist at the San Francisco Chronicle during the murders, became obsessed with the case and eventually wrote 2 books, Zodiac in 1986 and Zodiac Unmasked in 2002. Graysmith's books, particularly the first, shaped public understanding of the case for decades. He championed Arthur Leigh Allen as the prime suspect and presented a compelling, though circumstantial, case. In 2007, director David Fincher adapted Graysmith's book into the film Zodiac, starring Jake Gyllenhaal, Mark Ruffalo, and Robert Downey Jr. The film is considered one of the most accurate depictions of a true crime case ever put to film, meticulously recreating events and the investigative process. The movie introduced the Zodiac case to a new generation and sparked renewed interest in solving it. Since then, the case has been explored in dozens of documentaries, hundreds of true crime podcasts, TV series like America's Most Wanted and Unsolved Mysteries, numerous books by investigators, journalists, and researchers, online forums dedicated to amateur investigation. The internet age has created a subculture of Zodiac researchers, amateur sleuths who dedicate enormous time and energy to solving the case. These communities have analyzed every letter and cipher, identified new suspects, conducted their own investigations, challenged official conclusions, sometimes harassed innocent people based on speculation. It's a double-edged sword. The collective intelligence of thousands of people has generated new insights and kept pressure on law enforcement to continue investigating. But it's also led to conspiracy theories, false accusations, and the spread of misinformation. The Zodiac symbol, the circle with crosshairs, has become iconic in popular culture. It appears on t-shirts, posters, and in countless movies and TV shows as a shorthand for mysterious serial killers. In a dark, twisted way, the Zodiac achieved exactly what he wanted: immortality through infamy. But we cannot forget that behind the mystery, the ciphers, the media sensation, and the pop culture fascination are real victims, real families who lost loved ones, real survivors who carry trauma. David Faraday, Betty Lou Jensen, Darlene Ferrin, Cecilia Shepard, Paul Stine. These were real people with lives, dreams, and futures. They deserve to be remembered as more than just entries in a true crime story. Michael Mageau and Brian Hartnell survived, but they carry the physical and emotional scars of their encounters with the Zodiac. They've had to live with the trauma while watching their attacker become a pop culture phenomenon. The families of the victims have had to endure decades of speculation, conspiracy theories, and media attention. Every new documentary, every new book, every new suspect theory reopens old wounds. The Zodiac case isn't just an intellectual puzzle or entertainment. It's a tragedy that devastated multiple families and terrorized an entire region. The Zodiac investigation never truly ended. It just evolved. In the 2000s, advances in DNA technology gave investigators new hope. DNA can be extracted from saliva on envelope seals, and the Zodiac licked his envelopes. In 2002, the San Francisco Police Department announced they had developed a partial DNA profile from saliva on Zodiac letters. This was huge. For the first time, there was potentially definitive physical evidence that could identify the killer. The DNA profile was run through CODIS, the national DNA database containing millions of profiles from convicted offenders. No match. This means either the Zodiac was never convicted of a crime that required DNA submission. He died before DNA databases were created. The DNA on the envelopes isn't the Zodiac's, contamination or handling by others. In recent years, genetic genealogy has revolutionized cold case investigations. This is the technique used to catch the Golden State Killer in 2018. Investigators upload DNA profiles to public genealogy databases, identify distant relatives, then build family trees to narrow down suspects. In 2020, the Vallejo Police Department announced they were using genetic genealogy to attempt to identify the Zodiac. The process is ongoing as of this recording, and any results have not been made public. Also in 2020, the 340-character cipher that had remained unsolved for 51 years was finally cracked by David Orenchak, Jarl Van Eyck, and Sam Blake. The solution didn't reveal the Zodiac's identity, disappointing many, but it did confirm the cipher was genuine and provided new insight into his psychology. The message demonstrated his obsession with the media narrative and his defiance of law enforcement. The FBI confirmed the solution was correct, validating decades of work by amateur and professional cryptographers. Today, multiple law enforcement agencies continue to maintain active investigations. San Francisco Police Department, Cold Case Unit; Vallejo Police Department, Detective Division; FBI, Violent Crimes Section; Napa County Sheriff's Office. All physical evidence has been preserved. DNA samples are regularly retested as technology improves. New suspects are investigated when credible tips come in. The case file numbers in the thousands of pages. If the Zodiac is still alive, he would be in his 80s or 90s. Most investigators believe he's dead. Serial killers of his generation rarely stopped killing voluntarily, and the cessation of confirmed attacks after 1969 suggests something changed. Death, incapacitation, or imprisonment for other crimes are the most likely explanations. Modern investigators who've worked the case are candid about the challenges. The passage of time has degraded evidence. Witnesses have died. Memories have faded. Early evidence collection wasn't up to modern standards. The sheer volume of information makes it difficult to find relevant leads, but they remain hopeful. Every few years, a new development emerges. A new technique becomes available. A new witness comes forward with information. And that's the thing about unsolved cases. They're only unsolved until they're not. The Golden State Killer went uncaught for 40 years before being identified in 2018. Other cold cases, decades old, have been solved through modern technology. The Zodiac case could be solved tomorrow, or next year, or 10 years from now. Or it might remain forever unsolved, a mystery that outlived its creator. Who was the Zodiac? Not his name, We've established that remains unknown. But who was he psychologically? What drove him? What can his behavior tell us about the man behind the symbol? Let's build a psychological profile based on his documented actions, his letters, and modern understanding of criminal psychology. Demographics based on witness descriptions and statistical analysis of serial killers. White male, confirmed by witnesses. Age in 1969, mid-20s to early 40s. Most likely 28 to 35. Height, 5'8" to 6 feet. Consensus from multiple witnesses. Weight, 180 to 250 pounds. Heavyset, not. Education, at least high school, possibly some college or military training. Employment, likely blue-collar or lower-level white-collar work. Relationship status, single or in an unstable relationship. Skills and background. The Zodiac demonstrated specific skill sets. Firearms proficiency. His shooting at Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs showed accuracy and comfort with weapons. He used different types of guns. 22 caliber, 9mm, suggesting knowledge and access to multiple firearms. This is consistent with military service, law enforcement, or being a shooting enthusiast. Cryptography. His ciphers demonstrated at least intermediate knowledge of code making. The 408 cipher used standard substitution techniques with multiple symbols for common letters. The 340 cipher was significantly more complex. Where did he learn this? Possible sources include military intelligence training, academic study, personal interest and self-education, or professional requirements. Outdoors knowledge. He was comfortable in isolated, rural locations. Lake Herman Road, Lake Berryessa. These weren't places a city person would easily navigate at night. He likely had experience with outdoor activities: hunting, fishing, camping, hiking. Geographic familiarity. He knew the Bay Area well. He knew which roads were secluded. He knew where to find payphones. He knew how to navigate between jurisdictions. This suggests he either lived in the area for years or had professional reasons to be familiar with it, possibly a delivery driver, salesman, or someone whose job required travel. Psychological characteristics. Organized offender. In criminal psychology, killers are often classified as organized or disorganized. The Zodiac was clearly organized. He planned his attacks. He brought weapons and tools. He chose locations strategically. He avoided leaving evidence. He had escape routes planned. Narcissistic personality. His letters reveal an overwhelming need for attention and recognition. He demanded media coverage. He created a symbol and brand identity. He corrected misconceptions about his crimes. He kept score. This is classic narcissistic behavior, an inflated sense of self-importance and a need for admiration. Power and control motivation. Unlike killers motivated by sexual sadism or rage, the Zodiac seemed motivated by power and control. He wanted to demonstrate his superiority over both his victims and law enforcement. His letters taunted police. His attacks showed planning and dominance. Even his choice to spare Brian Hartnell's life while killing Cecilia Shepard suggests he was playing God, deciding who lives and who dies. Lack of empathy. His writings show zero empathy for his victims. He referred to them as slaves for his afterlife. He expressed joy in killing. He threatened children without apparent remorse. This suggests antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy, a fundamental inability to feel empathy or guilt. Intelligence. The Zodiac was clearly intelligent. His ciphers, his ability to evade capture, his sophisticated understanding of media and psychology all indicate above-average intelligence. However, his misspellings and occasional crude language suggest he may not have been as educated as he wanted people to believe. Possible paranoia. Some of his later letters show signs of paranoia. He accused police of deliberately withholding information. He worried about being caught. He seemed to believe people were conspiring against him. This could be genuine paranoia, or it could be performative, part of his psychological game. Behavioral patterns. The Zodiac's behavior suggests several patterns. Cooling off periods. He could wait months between attacks, suggesting he had good impulse control and could function normally in society between killings. Escalation, then cessation. His attacks escalated from quick shootings to prolonged knife attacks to a daylight murder in a populated neighborhood. Then they stopped. This pattern is unusual. Serial killers typically don't stop voluntarily. Possible explanations include death, imprisonment for other crimes, severe illness, or relocation. Media obsession. He monitored news coverage closely. He responded to specific articles and TV programs. He demanded corrections when others claimed to be him. This suggests he had regular access to newspapers and television. Risk-taking behavior. His attacks became progressively riskier. Lake Berryessa in daylight. Paul Stine in San Francisco with witnesses nearby. Walking past police officers minutes after a murder. This could indicate either increasing confidence or a subconscious desire to be caught. Possible occupations. Based on his skills and schedule, possible occupations include military veteran, particularly someone with intelligence or ordnance training, mechanic or technician, explaining firearms and technical knowledge, delivery or truck driver, explaining geographic familiarity and flexible schedule, postal worker, explaining knowledge of mail systems and schedules, factory or warehouse worker, explaining lower-level skills with flexible hours, security guard, explaining comfort with weapons and nighttime activity. Why did he stop? The cessation of confirmed attacks after October 1969 is one of the biggest mysteries. Possible explanations: death, natural causes, accident or suicide, imprisonment, arrested for another crime, relocation, moved out of the area and continued killing elsewhere, disability, illness or injury prevented further attacks, fear, the massive investigation and near capture after Paul Stine scared him into stopping, satisfaction, he achieved his goal of notoriety and didn't need to kill anymore. Most criminologists believe death or imprisonment are the most likely explanations. Serial killers rarely stop voluntarily, especially when they're successful at evading capture. It's easy to get lost in the puzzle of the Zodiac case, the ciphers, the suspects, the investigation. But we must never forget that at the center of this story are real people whose lives were stolen. David Arthur Faraday, 17 years old, a star student and athlete at Vallejo High School. David was popular, well-liked, and had a bright future ahead of him. He was on his first date with Betty Lou Jensen when they encountered the Zodiac on Lake Herman Road. David was shot once behind the ear, execution style. He died instantly. He never had a chance to fight back, to run, to defend Betty Lou or himself. His parents, brothers, and friends were devastated. His mother would later say that a part of her died that night too. David represented promise and potential, all of it erased in a moment by senseless violence. Betty Lou Jensen, 16 years old, a beautiful, vibrant girl involved in school activities and loved by everyone who knew her. Betty Lou was excited about her first date with David. She never came home. Betty Lou ran. She tried to escape. She made it 30 feet from the car before the Zodiac shot her 5 times in the back. She died on that cold, dark road, terrified and alone. Her family was shattered. Her mother never fully recovered from the loss. Betty Lou's younger siblings grew up in the shadow of her murder, their family forever marked by tragedy. Darlene Elizabeth Farron, 22 years old, a young mother with a vivacious personality. Darlene worked as a waitress and was known for her friendly, outgoing nature. She had her whole life ahead of her, a daughter to raise, dreams to pursue. On July 4th, 1969, she was shot multiple times at Blue Rock Springs Park. She died before reaching the hospital. Her daughter grew up without a mother. Her family was left with questions that would never be answered. Some researchers have speculated that Darlene may have known her killer, that the attack was personal rather than random. Whether true or not, it adds another layer of tragedy to her story. Cecilia Ann Shepard, 22 years old, a college student at Pacific Union College with a bright future. Cecilia was spending a peaceful afternoon at Lake Berryessa with a friend when the Zodiac appeared in his homemade costume. Cecilia was stabbed 10 times. She fought for her life for 2 days in the hospital before succumbing to her injuries on September 29, 1969. Brian Hartnell, who survived, had to live with the trauma of watching her die, unable to help her. Cecilia's family lost a daughter, a sister, a friend. Her death was particularly cruel, prolonged, terrifying, and brutal. Paul Lee Stine, 29 years old, a graduate student studying English, on October 11, 1969, he picked up a fare that would be his last. The Zodiac shot him once in the head, killing him instantly. Then the killer tore away a piece of Paul's shirt as a trophy, a final indignity. Paul's fiancée lost the man she was going to marry. His family lost a son. His friends lost a kind, intelligent person who had so much to offer the world. The survivors. Michael Mageau survived the Blue Rock Springs attack, but was severely wounded, shot in the face, neck, and leg. He spent weeks in the hospital and carries the physical and emotional scars to this day. He watched Darlene die beside him, helpless to save her. Brian Hartnell survived the Lake Berryessa attack, stabbed 6 times in the back. He had to watch as Cecilia was brutally stabbed, bound, and unable to help her. He carries survivor's guilt, wondering if there was something he could have done differently. Both survivors have had to live with the trauma of their encounters while watching their attacker become a notorious figure in popular culture. Every movie, every documentary, every book reopens their wounds. These are the people we must remember, not as statistics or case numbers, but as individuals with families who loved them, friends who missed them, and futures that were stolen. The Zodiac wanted to be remembered, but let's make sure we also remember his victims, not just for how they died, but for how they lived. After examining all the evidence, all the suspects, and all the investigative efforts, we're left with the fundamental question: why was the Zodiac never caught? The answer is complex, involving a combination of factors, technological limitations. As we've discussed, 1960s law enforcement lacked the tools that would be standard today. No DNA databases, no computerized fingerprint systems, no security cameras, no cell phone tracking, no internet to coordinate multi-jurisdictional investigations instantly. The Zodiac operated in what might be called the golden age for serial killers, a time when forensic technology was primitive, but criminal sophistication was advancing. He understood these limitations and exploited them. Jurisdictional fragmentation. The Zodiac's crimes spanned multiple jurisdictions, each with its own police department, investigators, and procedures. In 1969, there was no centralized task force initially. Information sharing was slow and informal. By the time patterns were recognized and agencies began coordinating, the Zodiac had already committed multiple attacks. The lack of a unified, immediate response gave him time and opportunity to evade capture. Intelligence and planning. The Zodiac was smart. He planned his attacks carefully. He chose isolated locations with multiple escape routes. He varied his methods and locations. He wore gloves at some crime scenes. He was careful about the evidence he left behind. His letters and ciphers, while providing clues, also wasted enormous amounts of investigative time. Police and FBI resources were devoted to decrypting codes and analyzing correspondence, while the trail of physical evidence grew cold. Luck. The Zodiac was also lucky. The miscommunication after the Paul Stine murder, when the dispatcher gave the wrong racial description, allowed him to walk past police officers who might have stopped and questioned him. That single mistake may have been the difference between solving the case and letting him escape. The fact that the fingerprints from the cab don't match any suspect, despite thousands of people being investigated, suggests either extreme luck or that the prints weren't actually the Zodiac's. Limited physical evidence. Despite 4 crime scenes and numerous letters, the physical evidence is surprisingly limited. Most of the attacks occurred in isolated areas with no witnesses. The killer used common weapons and materials. The evidence that exists, fingerprints, DNA, footprints, has not matched anyone in databases. This could mean the Zodiac died before his DNA or fingerprints were entered into any system. Or it could mean contamination or misidentification of evidence. Or it could mean the evidence simply isn't distinctive enough to identify him from the millions of possibilities. Witness reliability. Multiple witnesses saw the Zodiac, but their descriptions vary. This is normal. Eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable. But it meant that composite sketches and physical descriptions couldn't definitively identify or exclude suspects. Michael Mageau identified Lawrence Kane as his attacker decades after the fact. But by then, memories had faded and suggestion could have influenced his identification. Kathleen Johns identified Arthur Leigh Allen from a photo, but her case may not even be connected to the Zodiac. The Zodiac's potential death. The most likely explanation for why the Zodiac was never caught is that he died before he could be identified. If he died in the 1970s or 1980s, before DNA databases existed, his identity would have gone with him. Many serial killers from this era were only identified decades later when new technology became available. If the Zodiac died before his DNA or fingerprints were collected and entered into any database, there would be nothing to match against the evidence from the crime scenes. The sheer volume of suspects, over 2,500 people, have been investigated as potential Zodiac suspects. This massive number reflects both the extensive investigative efforts and the difficulty of narrowing down possibilities with limited evidence. When you're looking for one person among millions with only partial physical descriptions and circumstantial evidence, the odds of success are extremely low. It's a needle in a haystack scenario, made worse by the passage of time. Imperfect evidence. There's a real possibility that some of the evidence attributed to the Zodiac isn't actually from him. The DNA on the letter envelopes could have come from postal workers or newspaper employees who handled them. The fingerprints on the cab could have come from previous passengers. The footprints could be from someone else at the scene. If investigators have been comparing suspect DNA and fingerprints to evidence that isn't actually from the Zodiac, they would exclude the real killer while pursuing false leads. The case is still active. It's important to remember that this case is still open and active. New evidence is still being analyzed. New suspects are still being investigated. New technologies are still being applied. The case may still be solved. Genetic genealogy has shown remarkable success in recent years. The Zodiac's DNA profile could be uploaded to genealogy databases and through family tree analysis. His identity could finally be determined, but it's also possible that the case will remain unsolved forever. Some mysteries are never answered. Some criminals are never caught. The Zodiac may be one of them, and perhaps that's the final cruel victory in his game with law enforcement. Remaining forever unknown, forever mysterious, forever the Zodiac. The Zodiac investigation, despite its failure to identify the killer, had profound impacts on law enforcement methodology and procedures. The lessons learned from this case shaped how police handle serial killer investigations to this day. Multi-jurisdictional cooperation. One of the clearest lessons from the Zodiac case was the critical importance of interagency cooperation. The fragmentation between Benicia, Vallejo, Napa, and San Francisco police departments allowed the Zodiac to slip through jurisdictional cracks. As a result, law enforcement agencies developed better protocols for multi-jurisdictional cases. The FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, or VICAP, was eventually created in 1985 specifically to help law enforcement agencies share information about violent crimes across jurisdictions. Today, when a serial killer is suspected of operating across multiple areas, task forces are formed immediately, pooling resources and information in ways that simply didn't happen in 1969. Behavioral profiling. The Zodiac case occurred just as the FBI was beginning to develop systematic approaches to criminal behavioral profiling. The case provided valuable data about organized serial killers, their planning, their communication patterns, their need for recognition. The FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, formed in 1972, studied cases like the Zodiac to develop profiles that could help predict killer behavior and narrow suspect pools. Today, behavioral analysis is a standard tool in major criminal investigations. Media relations. The Zodiac's manipulation of the media forced law enforcement to develop better strategies for managing information in high-profile cases. The question of whether to publish the killer's letters and demands, giving him the attention he craved, versus refusing and potentially provoking more violence was unprecedented. Modern law enforcement has developed more sophisticated approaches to media relations in serial killer cases, balancing public safety needs, investigative strategy, and the reality of 24-hour news cycles and social media. Evidence preservation. The Zodiac case demonstrated the importance of preserving physical evidence even when current technology can't analyze it. The saliva DNA on the letter envelopes was useless in 1969, but became potentially case-solving evidence decades later. Today, evidence preservation protocols are much more rigorous, with the understanding that future technologies may be able to extract information that current methods cannot. Cipher and code analysis. The Zodiac ciphers pushed law enforcement to develop better resources for cryptographic analysis. The SBI and other agencies expanded their cipher-breaking capabilities, and today have sophisticated computer systems and expert cryptographers available for cases involving coded messages. Fingerprint and DNA databases. The frustration of having fingerprints and DNA but no matches spurred the development of comprehensive databases. AFIS, the automated fingerprint identification system, and CODIS, the combined DNA index system, now contain millions of profiles and can identify matches in seconds rather than months or years. These systems have solved countless cold cases, including cases from the same era as the Zodiac killings. Victim advocacy. The lasting trauma experienced by the victims. Families and survivors highlighted the need for better victim services and advocacy. Today, law enforcement agencies have victim assistance programs that provide support, information, and counseling to those affected by violent crimes. Cold case units. The Zodiac case helped demonstrate that unsolved cases can still be solved decades later with new technology and fresh perspectives. Many police departments now have dedicated cold case units that review unsolved investigations, apply new forensic techniques, and follow up on old leads. Public engagement. While the Zodiac case generated enormous public interest, some of it helpful, much of it not, it demonstrated both the benefits and challenges of public engagement in investigations. Today, law enforcement uses tip lines, social media, and public appeals more strategically while also being more aware of the risks of false leads and amateur interference. The Zodiac investigation was a learning experience for law enforcement, purchased at the terrible cost of lives lost and families devastated. But the lessons learned have helped catch countless other killers and prevent future tragedies. One of the most puzzling aspects of the Zodiac case is the apparent cessation of confirmed attacks after October 1969. The letters continued for a while, but the killings stopped. Why? Let's examine the major theories. Theory 1, he died. This is the theory favored by many investigators. Serial killers rarely stop voluntarily, especially when they're successfully evading capture. The most common reason for a serial killer to stop is death. The Zodiac could have died from natural causes, accident, suicide, or even been murdered. If he died in the 1970s or early 1980s, it would explain why his DNA and fingerprints never appeared in databases. They were never collected. Evidence supporting this theory: the complete cessation of confirmed attacks after October 1969, the eventual cessation of letters by the mid-1970s, the failure to match DNA and fingerprints despite extensive databases, the fact that he would likely be dead by now anyway, given his probable age. Evidence against this theory: some letters claiming to be from the Zodiac arrived as late as 1974. No death record has been connected to any prime suspect. It seems unlikely that such a meticulous, careful person would die accidentally. Theory 2, he was imprisoned. Another strong theory is that the Zodiac was arrested and imprisoned for another crime, making it impossible for him to continue his attacks. Many serial killers have been caught for other offenses, traffic violations, burglary, assault, before their serial crimes were discovered. The Zodiac could have been arrested for an unrelated crime and imprisoned, ending his killing spree without anyone realizing who he was. Evidence supporting this theory: extensive background checks of prisoners from that era haven't identified any strong candidates. Someone imprisoned would likely have eventually bragged about being the Zodiac. Prison records from the era are fairly comprehensive and have been checked. Theory 3, he moved away. Perhaps the Zodiac relocated to another area and either stopped killing or continued killing in a way that wasn't connected to his California crimes. Evidence supporting this theory: geographic mobility could explain the cessation of Bay Area attacks. Some unsolved murders in other states bear superficial similarities. Military personnel or others with mobile occupations could have transferred. Evidence against this theory: the Zodiac seemed deeply familiar with and attached to the Bay Area. His letters indicated knowledge of local media coverage. No other region has had a similar pattern of crimes with letters and ciphers. Theory 4, he was scared into stopping. The massive investigation after the Paul Stine murder, with police nearly catching him, composite sketches widely distributed, and intense media coverage may have frightened the Zodiac into stopping. Evidence supporting this theory: the Paul Stine murder was by far his closest call with capture. The investigation intensity increased dramatically after this murder. His letters after this point seem more defensive and paranoid. Evidence against this theory: serial killers typically don't have the impulse control to stop permanently out of fear. His later letters still showed arrogance and lack of genuine fear. If he was scared, why continue writing letters that could be traced? Theory 5, he achieved his goal. Perhaps the Zodiac's primary motivation was notoriety, and once he achieved sufficient fame, he no longer needed to kill. Evidence supporting this theory is clear desire for media attention and recognition. The fact that he became one of the most famous criminals in American history. His letters focused heavily on his notoriety and reputation. Evidence against this theory: the psychological needs that drive serial killers don't typically get satisfied. He claimed to have killed 37 people, suggesting he wanted more than 5 confirmed deaths. This theory doesn't align with what we know about serial killer psychology. Theory 6, he became physically unable to continue. Illness, injury, or disability could have prevented the Zodiac from continuing his attacks. Evidence supporting this theory: the sudden cessation of attacks, the eventual cessation of letters, The physical demands of his attacks required mobility and health. Evidence against this theory: his letters continued for years after the attacks stopped. No suspects have been identified who became seriously ill or disabled at the right time. He would likely have continued writing if he was only physically disabled. Theory 7. He continued killing in different ways. Perhaps the Zodiac didn't stop. He simply evolved his methods to avoid detection and stopped writing letters. Evidence supporting this theory: the Zodiac showed capacity for changing his MO. Bay Area had many unsolved murders in the 1970s and beyond. He may have learned that letters were providing too many clues. Evidence against this theory: his need for recognition seems incompatible with staying silent. The letters were clearly important to him. Modern analysis of unsolved murders from that era hasn't found strong connections. The most likely explanation: most experts believe the Zodiac either died or was imprisoned shortly after his last confirmed attack. The complete cessation of both attacks and, eventually, authenticated letters suggests something permanent happened, rather than a voluntary decision to stop. The fact that genetic genealogy and modern investigative techniques haven't identified him suggests he died before his DNA entered any database, meaning probably in the 1970s or early 1980s, before DNA collection became standard. But we may never know for certain. The reason he stopped is yet another mystery in a case full of them. So, here is the conclusion. We've traveled through the complete timeline of the Zodiac investigation, from that cold December night in 1968, through decades of investigation, speculation, and dead ends. We've examined the victims, the evidence, the suspects, and the theories. Now, as we close this chapter of history, what are we left with? A mystery. An unsolved puzzle that has captivated millions for over 50 years. The Zodiac Killer represents something that makes us deeply uncomfortable. The idea that someone can commit horrible crimes, taunt authorities, and simply disappear without consequences. It challenges our belief in justice and our faith in law enforcement's ability to protect us. 5 confirmed victims, 2 survivors, thousands of investigative hours, millions of dollars spent, countless lives affected, and still no definitive answer to the simple question: who was he? The investigation continues. As I record this, cold case detectives are still working on the case. Genetic genealogy techniques are being applied. New tips are being followed up. The possibility exists that tomorrow, next month, or next year, a breakthrough could occur. We've seen it happen before. The Golden State Killer evaded capture for over 40 years before being identified through genetic genealogy in 2018. Other cold cases decades old have been solved through DNA technology, new witness testimony, or deathbed confessions. The Zodiac case could be solved. The evidence exists. The DNA profile exists. The fingerprints exist. What's missing is the match, the connection between that evidence and a specific individual. But even if the case is never solved, it has left a lasting impact on law enforcement methodology, forcing improvements in interagency cooperation and forensic science recognition, on criminal psychology, providing insights into organized serial killers and their need for recognition, on popular culture, inspiring countless books, movies, documentaries, and discussions, on the victims' families who continue to live with loss and seek justice, on the communities that were terrorized, forever changed by those years of fear. The Zodiac wanted immortality. He wanted to be remembered. He wanted to prove his intelligence and superiority. In a dark, twisted way, he succeeded. His symbol is instantly recognizable. His ciphers are studied by cryptographers worldwide. His case is analyzed by criminologists and law enforcement professionals as a teaching example. But let's remember what else he left behind. David Faraday, 17 years old, who never got to graduate high school. Betty Lou Jensen, 16 years old, who never got to grow up. Darlene Ferrin, 22 years old, whose daughter grew up without a mother. Cecilia Shepard, 22 years old, who fought for 2 days before dying. Paul Stine, 29 years old, who never finished his degree or got married. These are the people who should be remembered, not as the Zodiac's victims, but as individuals with their own stories, their own lives, their own worth. The Zodiac may have won his game with law enforcement, remaining unidentified and unpunished. But he doesn't get to define the narrative. We do, and we choose to remember the victims, honor the survivors, and continue the search for truth and justice. Because cases like this aren't about the criminals. They're about the victims. They're about justice. They're about our commitment as a society to never stop seeking answers, no matter how long it takes. The Zodiac investigation remains open, active, ongoing. And until it's solved, every new technique, every new technology, every new lead will be pursued. Because David, Betty Lou, Darlene, Cecilia, and Paul deserve justice, even if it comes 50, 60, or 70 years after their deaths. That's what we do at Reborn the Past. We resurrect these stories not to glorify criminals, but to honor victims, understand history, and keep the search for truth alive. The Zodiac Killer may have disappeared into history, but the investigation continues. The memory of his victims endures, and the hope for justice remains. As we close this deep dive into one of America's most infamous unsolved cases, I want to leave you with a few final thoughts. First, if you have information about the Zodiac case, any information, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, please contact law enforcement. Tips can be submitted to the San Francisco Police Department, the Vallejo Police Department, the FBI's San Francisco Field Office, even decades later. A small detail you remember or a story someone told you could be the missing piece that solves this case. Second, remember that true crime isn't just entertainment. These are real tragedies involving real people. When we discuss cases like this, we should do so with respect for the victims and their families who continue to live with these losses. Third, the Zodiac case demonstrates both the progress we've made in criminal investigation and the humbling reminder that some cases may never be solved. But that doesn't mean we stop trying. Cold cases are solved every year, sometimes decades after the crimes occurred. The tools exist now that didn't exist in 1969: DNA analysis, genetic genealogy, computer databases, digital forensics. The Zodiac could be identified at any time. Fourth, this case shows us the importance of supporting law enforcement and forensic science funding. The investigators who work on cold cases are dedicated professionals who refuse to give up on victims, no matter how much time has passed. They deserve our support and resources to continue their work. And finally, never forget the names: David Arthur Faraday, Betty Lou Jensen, Darlene Elizabeth Ferrin, Cecilia Ann Shepard, Paul Lee Stine. These 5 people had their lives stolen by someone who wanted to be famous. Don't give him that satisfaction. Remember the victims. Remember their lives, not just their deaths. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of history's darkest mysteries. If you found this deep dive valuable, please like this video, subscribe to Reborn the Past for more historical investigations, and share this with anyone interested in true crime and unsolved mysteries. Leave a comment below with your thoughts. Do you think the Zodiac will ever be identified? Do you have theories about who he was or why he stopped? Do you remember this case from when it happened? I'd love to hear your perspectives. And remember, history isn't just about the past. It's about understanding how we got here, learning from what happened, and applying those lessons to build a better future. Until next time, this is Reborn the Past, bringing history back to life.